What is going on, guys? It's Modded Warfare here. Welcome back to another PS4 and PS5 jailbreak news update. So we've got quite a lot of topics to cover here in this video, so let's go ahead and dive straight in. So first of all, we have an update to the Mast1c0re exploit for the PS2, the PS2 emulator. This, of course, is an exploit in the PS2 emulator for the PS4 and PS5 that can be triggered with an existing exploit inside a PS2 game. The one that's currently being used for this is Okage Shadow King, or Okage Shadow King, however it's pronounced. So, of course, there's a buffer overflow that can be triggered from a modified save file in that game that can then be used to trigger the vulnerability in the emulator as well. And currently, this is being used to sideload other PS2 games. So you can sideload other PS2 games on the PS5 and PS4 on the latest firmware. However, the save file that's been used for this has not been released. So unfortunately, we can't actually test this out ourselves. And part 2 hasn't been released either. Now, part 2 of the exploit is the part that has the bigger implications, with the possibility of running native PS4 apps. So using this PS2 game to sideload other PS4 games, potentially, or, you know, PS4 apps like maybe emulators or homebrew apps. So that's currently not possible at the moment because we don't have part 2, and again, we don't even have the save file to try part 1 either. So Macaulay, who figured out how to implement this exploit but hasn't released the save file, has released a library now for analyzing and creating the PS2 game save files, and this is apparently the library that he used himself to create the modified save file. So maybe there's more of a chance that somebody else can, you know, try and do this now that this library is out there. So for example, it has the ability here to import files into a PS2 game save, as well as export a file from the game save so that you could modify it and then import it back in there. So you can essentially create modified PS2 save files using this library. Also has the ability to list files and directories within the game save, rename files within the game save, and delete files from the game save as well. So unfortunately, if this does become like an actual exploit for the PS4 or PS5, it's a bit of an awkward one to have everything set up correctly to use this. For example, of course, you actually have to have the game, the Okage Shadow King game, actually downloaded on your PS4 or PS5, which means you have to have a retail copy of it licensed, which means you have to actually download it on a PS4 or PS5. That's on the latest firmware right now, so that you can get the licenses on there, so that if they ever patch it in future, you'll still be able to run the current version on your current firmware, because you'll still have the licenses on there. Which means if you're on a previous firmware version waiting for a jailbreak, or you're on an older jailbreak, you're not going to be able to do that. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get that game on there. So that's a bit of an issue. Obviously, I would not recommend updating to the latest firmware just to get this game. If you're already on the latest firmware, by all means, you might as well get it. But if you're on a previous firmware because you're waiting for a jailbreak, I would not recommend updating just to get this game, because we don't have part 2 yet and we don't know the full extent of part 2. So yeah, it may not be worth it. So yeah, that's basically the issue right there. There's also some issues with the save files, because obviously you need to make a modified save file, which means you have to reassign the save to your profile and everything. But that can be done in Apollo. So I'm sure if you don't have a current jailbreak for the PS4, you can probably just... There'll be people who will offer the service probably to re-sign the save files for you, maybe even charge a few dollars or something. So I don't think that will be too much of a big deal. And obviously you can use Save Wizard as well if you have Save Wizard. So that's not really much of an issue. The big deal is just getting the game on the system to begin with, getting a licensed copy of it. So that's the only main issue. So what I thought I would try and do, because I'm in a bit of a unique position, because I downloaded the Okage Shadow King game when I was on 10.01, when I did the revert video, where I took a jailbreakable PS4, updated it to the latest firmware, and then reverted it back to the jailbreakable firmware again. And I downloaded that game when I was on the latest firmware. However, when I reverted back to the jailbreakable firmware again, I had to restore my old hard drive image, which meant that it did not have the licenses for the game on there anymore. However, I did keep a copy of the 10.01 hard drive, so I mounted that on my computer and basically got access to the user partition. And once I got access to the user partition, I was able to then go to the licenses folder in the home folder and grab the licenses for the game, the Okage Shadow King game, which is the RIF file and the IDX file, and copy that out to my computer. So once I had those license files, I also got the package file. It's encrypted on the hard drive, so I had to get it elsewhere by essentially downloading it on my PS5, which is on the latest firmware, and monitoring my network traffic to get the link on the server to download it. So I've got the retail copy of the game and the license files, And so what I did is I installed it to my 9.00 PS4 to see if I could get it to run. So of course, when I just installed the package, it would give me the generic error when I tried to run it that I need to purchase it from the PSN store. So what I did was copy the license files, of course, across, and also activated my local account on the PS4 with the same account ID as the account that I purchased the game on. However, it still would not run. It never gave me the error message again about, you know, having to purchase it from the store, but it did give me a generic CE-36 error or something like that, and it just was not able to launch it. So I thought maybe perhaps there's also a console ID check in there because this is a different console. So what I did was installed it all, did the same thing on the original console that I actually purchased the game on, even though it's reverted back to a jailbreakable firmware, and tried to run it again. And this time it got a little bit further. It managed to come up with saying update now or update later. But when I click update later, it just does not launch the game. It just kicks me back out to the home screen. So unfortunately, I was not able to do that. I did try to install the game update as well, 1.01. It still didn't launch. So unfortunately, it looks like there's no shortcuts at the moment. If you want to get this game, you are going to have a PS4 or PS5 on the latest firmware that you can purchase it and download it on. And that's kind of the only way to get it to run on your system right now. So yeah, that's a bit of an unfortunate situation. Maybe there's something I missed that I could do to the PS4 or to the license file to get it to run. If you know, then definitely let me know. But at the moment, it doesn't look like it. So yeah, anyway, that's what we've got so far with the whole PS2 emulator exploit, the Mast1c0re exploit. So let's go ahead and move on to the next piece of news, which is the fact that we have a new beta firmware for the PS5 and PS4, beta version 7 for the PS5 and beta version 10.50, I believe, for the PS4. Now, so far, there was a WebKit vulnerability discovered that worked up to the latest firmware. And so far, I've seen one person test on 7.0 on the PS5, and it does still appear to be vulnerable. But just because it's vulnerable on the beta firmware does not necessarily mean it will still be vulnerable on the retail firmware. I haven't seen any tests on 10.50 for the PS4 yet, but I suspect it will be the same. It will probably work on the beta, but could be patched in the main firmware release. Okay, so moving on, we also have from IFAI Compa PS5 RNPS e-packages by Sony's official server, 73 firmware e-packages from firmware 2.0 all the way up to 6.90. So these are RNPS apps, which are React Native PlayStation applications, which are essentially web apps, so different to your normal, native applications that you would install on the PS5. And these are the system apps, as you can see here. They're documented for all these different firmware versions. If we take a look at the one for 4.03, you've got them all in these e-packages, which are essentially package files, but for these web-based apps. So the interesting thing about these, apparently these are all just regular system apps by the looks of things that you normally have on your PS5 anyway. However, because they're these web-based applications, they could potentially be modified in some way to create some kind of custom version, or we could potentially install the newer apps on an older firmware or install the older versions of the apps on a newer firmware. So yeah, some interesting implications from this. We also have the conversion.zip, which is from Jose Gonzalez, which is the what it looks like when you actually have them installed on the PS4. So if you wanted to copy them directly over to the system EX and then RNPS directory on your PS5 to install them, then you can do it that way as well instead of trying to install these e-packages, because I think the package installer doesn't recognize these e-packages by default, so there must be some other way to install them. So yeah, anyway, pretty neat that they've managed to document these e-packages for all these different firmware versions from 2.0 all the way to 6.90. So next we have an article on wololo.net, which I'll leave in the video description. Just wanted to briefly mention this, that Specter has shared a plugin for Binary Ninja for reverse engineering AMD Secure Processor Loader, or AMD-SP and AMD-PSP, which apparently is a microcontroller coprocessor integrated within AMD's own chips that provides the necessary functionality needed for remote corporate asset management and dedicated security subsystem and secure booting. So yeah, apparently the PS5 has this chip in it, and of course Spectre's now released a plugin that will hopefully allow you to reverse engineer it, which is pretty interesting. So there could be something interesting that comes from this. So I just wanted to briefly mention it here. The whole article will be linked in the video description if you want to read more into it. But we're going to move on here. So we have another article from wololo.net, And again, this one will be in the description as well. There are keys incoming for the mysterious CP box. This is an interesting one because, yeah, there's this weird box, this mysterious box for the PS5. And, you know, it's theorized that apparently this is for activating test kits on DevNet, which is apparently what it's for. Or it could be something that's already integrated into development kits, but needs to be a separate box for test kits, because test kits are just like regular PS5s. So it may need this external box to go along with it, or for just activating test kits in general. Or of course, there's other speculation about what this box could be used for, like simulating PSN before PSN was available for the PS5, so that developers could, you know, test their online functionality of their games, various things like that. But anyway, key extraction is in process, which means some of the developers have access to this device and are trying to extract the keys from it, which could potentially allow them to activate test kits in the future. Or maybe some of these keys could be useful for something else on the PS5. So probably not the SAMU keys for getting custom firmware going on the PS5, but nevertheless, could be interesting. So moving on from that, of course, there's a few other things I want to cover here just quickly. So Master S9 released the PS5 Themes Tool, which can allow you to apply some custom themes to the PS5, which is pretty handy. Although currently there's only really like 1 or 2 themes in there right now, and of course the default theme to reset things, but I'm sure he'll be adding more themes as time goes on, so I'll leave that linked in the video description. And for the PS4, S&D Tech has released a Android version of his PS4 toolset. It's not complete yet, it doesn't have all the functions that the PS4 toolset you know, Windows app has, but it still has a lot of options here. For a Android device, for example, you've got the option to add your custom avatar, change the font on the PS4. There's a Gold Hen package sender. There you can also hide and show apps on the home screen, as well as a kind of multimedia manager, which I believe at the moment just shows you like your screenshots and stuff, which is pretty handy. Grabs all the screenshots from your PS4 and displays them on your Android device, as well as permanent notifications, which are the notification shortcuts, which can be used to launch settings and other options on the PS4. So pretty handy stuff there as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed it or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one.